Hello again. Welcome to another lesson in AP Comparative Government. Today we're going to be talking about political economy. The key objectives today are to understand how states are involved in the management of markets and property, to discuss how states provide public goods, which are shared by society to some collective benefit, to distinguish between political economic systems and how they reconcile freedom and equality, to compare different political economic systems through human development, wealth, and inequality, and to analyze the future trends of political economic systems. An economy relies on an array of institutions that enable individuals to exchange goods and resources with one another. Economic institutions directly influence politics and vice versa. The economy is one of the major arenas of the struggle over freedom and equality. The study of how politics and economics are related and how their relationship shapes the balance between freedom and equality is commonly known as political economy. Because states control money, they have a great deal of influence over their domestic economies. Part of this power comes through what is known as a central bank, an institution that controls how much money is flowing through the economy, as well as how much it costs to borrow money in that economy. One of the main ways a central bank influences two areas is by changing a national interest rate. The rate charged to private banks when they need to borrow funds from the central bank or one another. Before we compare the different types of relationships between states and economies around the world, we need to familiarize ourselves with the basic components of political economy. The most fundamental components of political economy are markets and property. Markets are the interactions between the forces of supply and demand, and they allocate resources through the process of those interactions. As these two forces interact, they create values for goods and services by arriving at specific prices. In short, markets are communities of buyers and sellers who are constantly interacting through the economic choices they make. Sellers seek to create products that will be in demand, buyers seek to buy the best or most goods at the lowest price, and markets are the medium through which buyers and sellers exchange these goods. Again, these markets emerge spontaneously and are not easily controlled by the state. Property is a second element critical to any economy. Property refers to the ownership of the goods and services exchanged through markets. Property can refer to land, buildings, businesses, or personal items, to name some of its most common forms. Without state power functioning in a fair manner, property is insecure. Property is not always tangible. Intellectual property, for example, refers to the ownership of a specific type of knowledge or content, a song, a piece of software, or even treatment for a specific disease. Like the role states play in regulating markets, the role they play in constructing and enforcing property rights, both between people and between the state and society, varies from state to state. States may fail to enforce the rights of individuals to protect their own property from other individuals by neglecting to enact or uphold laws against counterfeiting or theft. States may also assume certain property rights for themselves, claiming ownership over property such as airwaves, oil, land, or businesses. In Mexico, for example, anything under the ground it belongs to the government. Another element of the economy is the collection of public goods available to the public. Public goods can be defined as those goods provided or secured by the states. They are available for society and indivisible, meaning that no one private person or organization can own them. Unlike private goods, with their inherent link to individual freedom, public goods can generate greater equality because the public is able to share broadly in their benefits. Things like lights on the streets and parks and streets are ways in which the government provides public goods to the public. The discussion of public goods leads us to the broader subject of social expenditures. The state's provisions of public benefits such as education, healthcare, and transportation, or what is commonly known as welfare or the welfare state, are key for these type of states. The more social democratic the country is, the more welfare benefits the country has. One major source of funds is taxation. As with social expenditures, taxation generates passionate opinions. Some view it as the means by which a greedy state takes the hard earned revenues of its citizens. stunting economic growth, whereas others see it as a critical tool for generating a basic level of equality. Basically, every single government is going to be needing to tax its people if it's a modern state, and those taxes are going to be used for either the services that the government provides or the public goods that we have. Regardless of one's opinion of taxation, societies expect states to provide a number of public goods and services, and for most countries, taxation is a key source of revenue. While the state makes revenue through taxation, the central bank must monitor the levels of inflation and deflation in the country to maintain its stability. Inflation, as we can see in this image, is an increase in the overall prices in the economy when the demand outstrips supply. Although small levels of inflation are not a problem, inflation can become problematic when it is too high, when we have a huge rat in the room, right? Wages and savings lose their value, and workers and those on fixed incomes, such as the retired, find that their money buys less and less. This is when people start stacking money into their beds. People press for higher wages or benefits to offset higher prices, further feeding inflation. Central banks can try to control inflation by raising interest rates, making credit more expensive, and thereby reducing spending and lowering prices. In extreme cases, countries can experience hyperinflation. This type of inflation that is higher than 50% a month for more than 2 months in a row. Normally, inflation is only like 4%. When governments find themselves lacking the tax revenues to cover basic expenditures or are unable to borrow from lenders, they may decide to print money to cover their debts, thus expanding the money supply. However, again, this leads to hyperinflation. More recently, states face the danger of deflation when too many goods are chasing too little money. This is the case also for the oil market right now. Dropping prices might sound like a good thing, but they can be devastating if businesses are unable to make a profit. Lowering the prices leads to unemployment, less spending, and even more deflation. These concerns drive states to implement regulations. Regulations are rules or orders that set the boundaries of a given procedure, and they take different forms. First, regulations may be fundamentally economic in nature. Such regulations may control prices for certain goods or services, such as food or energy. There might also be economic regulations, which may also control what firms may operate in what markets. These economic regulations might also control what type of products those firms might be creating. National rail systems, for example, have functioned in many countries as either a private or state monopoly. In other words, a market controlled by a single producer. In many countries, monopolies are banned. However, in a lot of countries, they're still really prevalent and control the majority of the economy. Disney could be an example of a huge monopoly. A second set of regulations can be described as essentially social in nature. In contrast to economic regulations that focus on how businesses function in the market, social regulations deal more with managing risk, such as safety, environmental standards. So again, these regulations are going to be banning products, banning environmental damage to specific regions, etc., etc. In most economies, markets are not only local, goods and services come from all over the world. States have a number of tools to influence trade. Tariffs, for example, are basically taxes on imported goods. Quotas limit the quality of a good coming into the country, and non-tariff regulatory barriers may create health packaging or other restrictions, and their purpose is to protect the state's citizens and make it difficult or expensive for foreign goods to be sold in the local market. Again, this is to protect the national market from deflating or inflating. Why regulate trade? There's four main reasons: to generate state revenue, to foster the local industry, to protect local jobs, and to keep wealth in the country. Why not? Again, to promote competition, to keep the cost of goods low, to stimulate domestic innovation, or basically to allow for the liberal market to flourish. So moving forward, we're going to be defining the different political economic systems that exist. States have taken radically different approaches to the ideal relationship between state and market, leading to a variety of distinct political economic systems around the world, all of which are unfortunately currently under challenge. A political economic system can be defined as the actual relationship between political and economic institution, in particular within a country, as well as the policies and outcomes that they create. Political economic systems can be seen as the attempt to realize an abstract ideology in the form of a real economic institution and real economic policies. Here's a chart defining the four different types of political economic systems. We're going to be talking about liberalism, social democracy, communism, and mercantilism. Specifically, we're going to be defining the role of the state in the economy, the role of the market, state capacity and autonomy, the importance of equality, possible flaws, and again, here are some examples, again, for liberalism, the United States, the UK, and the former British colonies; for social democracy, Europe, Germany, Sweden, the Nordic states; for communism, Cuba, the Soviet Union, North Korea. There's fewer and fewer examples each day. And for mercantilism, we have Japan. After the war, it was huge. And South Korea are also mercantilist states. Mercantilism was also prominent in imperialistic times. Liberalism places a high priority on individual political and economic freedom and advocates limiting state power in order to foster and protect this freedom. Liberalism assumes that individuals are best suited to take responsibility for their own behavior and well-being, and thus free market and private property serve as key tenets for this type of political system. For liberals, the best state is a weak one, constraining its own autonomy and capacity. The liberal tenets of laissez-faire, French for let do, which holds that the economy should be allowed to do what it wishes, is key for this development of a liberal market. This is what we typically think of as capitalism. Capitalism is a system of private property and free markets, which is solely based on profit. Again, we're going to be talking about how capitalism has changed democratic regimes later on. Liberalism as an political economic system then is defined by its emphasis on individual freedoms over collective equality and on the power of markets over the state. A key person to understand for liberalism is Adam Smith. He's the founder of liberal economics. He wrote The Wealth of Nations, which is considered one of the first texts on modern economics, and articulated the idea that economic development requires limited government interference. He calls an invisible hand that's going to be manipulating both demand and supply in the market. This invisible hand is going to be the point of equilibrium that is going to be setting the prices. For the past 2 decades, social democracy and liberalism have appeared to be the only viable political economic systems, but even the countries using these systems have been undergoing further economic liberalization, cutting taxes, reducing regulation, privatizing state-owned businesses and public goods, and expanding property rights. Again, this goes hand in hand with laissez-faire and capitalism. When we talk about economic liberalization, again, we need to talk about the lessening of government regulations, freeing the market up so that demand and supply work its way into regulating the market itself. Social democracy functions on a foundation of capitalism. Private property and open markets are going to be helping create this political economic system. They reject communist call for revolution and the state appropriation of private property and wealth. However, social democracy accepts a role for private property and market forces and remains cautious of the liberalism within it because the ultimate benefits are the benefits of society. Proponents of this way of thinking see the state not as a threat to society or the economy, but as the creator of social rights that are otherwise lost in the viscosity and absurdity of the market itself. According to social democracy, the state should make available a wide array of public goods, such as healthcare, pensions, and higher education. The goal of equality requires a higher level of social expenditure to ensure basic benefits for all. Taxes make these social expenditures possible, while also redistributing wealth from the rich to the poor. In terms of social democracies, the main thinker is going to be Edward Bernstein. He writes Evolutionary Socialism in 1898. where he rejects Marxist beliefs in the inevitability of revolution, but he wants that economic equality for all in terms of social democracy. How does social democracy seek to achieve greater inequality? First, through really high taxes. People have to pay the taxes in order for society and the state to function. Again, they have really high levels of social expenditure. However, the benefits that come with it are really high as well. There is high levels of trade, and there's a lot of government regulation. The political economic system of communism chooses effectively to eliminate individual freedom to achieve equality. Communist thinkers such as Karl Marx began with the premise that capitalism, with its private property and free markets, cannot truly serve the needs of society as a whole. Communists view private property and the markets as a form of power that inevitably leads to one person or grouping gaining control over the others, the creation of a bourgeoisie. Economic competition between peoples creates exploitation and the development of social classes in which a small group of the wealthy dominates and benefits from the labor of the poor majority or the proletariat. Communist systems use the state to transform markets and property. Private property is fully nationalized, placed in the hands of the state on behalf of the people. In other words, the entire economy becomes a public good, existing for the benefit of all. Because communist states centralize all economic decisions, making an ownership of many of the essential tasks of states in other political economic systems, are fundamentally different under communism. Taxation takes an indirect form through fixed prices and wages. Any profit produced by a worker or a firm goes to the state for public expenditures. You cannot keep any profit for yourself because everything is owned by everyone. Labor is allocated by the state, so unemployment is not an issue, but if you don't have enough industries, then how are you going to be providing that? Social expenditures are extensive. All basic services, including healthcare, education, retirement, and even leisure activities, have to be owned and provided by the state. Moving forward, we're going to be talking about mercantilism. Mercantilism focuses on the needs of the state itself. National economic power is paramount, and the domestic economy is an instrument to generate that power. Mercantilist states focus in particular on their position in the international system, for they believe that economic weaknesses undermine national sovereignty. Mercantilism is the oldest of the four political economic systems. In some cases, they may rely on partial or full state ownership of specific industries. Sometimes they are called parastatals, and they attempt to create or control businesses that are viewed as critical for international competitiveness. So this happened during the age of discovery, after the age of discovery, during colonization, where most of these countries were focusing on the major industries of the colonies that they had control over. Tariff barriers, low social expenditures, and minimum taxation help solidify this political economic system. Here we have a map of the major industries that we see across the empires of the world at that time. Mercantilism stems from the work of Friedrich List. He writes The National System of Political Economy in 1841, where he rejects free trade theories of liberalism, arguing that states must play a strong role in protecting and developing their national economy. Again, we have a good image of what is mercantilism. We have a modern country with multiple colonies. Again, we have a focus on specific industries, and the country is going to be using those industries to benefit itself. We also need to learn how to compare political economic systems. The most common tool that economists use to measure economic development is gross domestic product, or GDP, which we earlier defined as a total market value of all goods and services produced in a country over a period of 1 year. GDP provides a basic benchmark for the average per capita income in a country. It is not the same as personal income, as it includes things like government expenditures, even cleaning up a natural disaster. Moreover, it does not assign a value to such things as leisure or innovation, and cost of living, making it difficult to compare countries between each other. Another major problem is that it fails to capture much of the quality of life in the country. You just get a number that is based on the economy and both economic expenditures and economic income. It does not account for crime levels, it does not account for mortality rates, and it does not account for the health of the environment. However, to address these difficulties, economists often calculate national GDP data on the basis of what is known as purchasing power parity. The PPP attempts to estimate the buying power of income in each country by comparing similar costs such as food and housing by using prices in the United States as a benchmark. For example, without PPP, Sweden's national income is much higher than Germany's, but when the cost of living in each country is factored in through the purchasing power parity, their economies are revealed to be the similar size. To understand and measure the amount of economic inequality in a society, political scientists use the GINI index. Completed equality is given a GINI ranking of 0, and complete inequality gets a ranking of 100. Thus, the greater the GINI index number, the greater the inequality in a given country is. Mexico, for example, it's in its 40s. The most unequal countries in the world are very poor. However, inequality is not the same thing as poverty. Poverty tends to be measured in terms of absolute wealth. Organizations like the World Bank establish benchmarks for world poverty rates. The lowest rate right now is typically less than $2 per person per day. In contrast, inequality is a measure of relative wealth. Thus, an entire society can become materially wealthy and grow more unequal at the same time. This is the case for Mexico. Another helpful measurement is the Human Development Index, HDI. This was created by the United Nations Development Program, which not only looks at the total amount of wealth in a society and its distribution, but also gives equal weight to income, health, life expectancy, and the average years of schooling. By looking at such data, we can consider whether the wealth generated in a country is actually used in a way that provides a basic standard of living for all through public or private means. In 2018, Norway was ranked at the number 1, and Niger came at the very bottom. Happiness is also a comparative indicator in political science. Happiness is at the core of human activity. It is a result of the interaction between freedom and equality. At the most basic level, we can observe that richer countries generally are happier than poorer ones. Furthermore, according to the Easterling paradox, again, Easterling paradox, developed by social scientist Richard Easterlin, when standards of living rise past a certain level around 10,000 to 15,000 per capita GDP, happiness stagnates. You're not gonna be happier if you get more money, but there is a limit to happiness in terms of money. However, outliers always appear, and even in cases where high income inequality exists, a country can be happy. So, even if you are a poor country, you can still have high levels of happiness, and such is the case for Mexico, Costa Rica, and Brazil. Again, thank you so much to Patrick O'Neill for his fantastic book, and we recognize the authors of all the media content in this presentation. Thanks for listening.